Okay, we got Landon's transmission out of his truck. Kind of curious to see what we find in it. He's been racing 670 with it all summer, and he did a couple of no prep races where he put a bottle in it. Truck makes a little over 1,700 horsepower at full weight with the bottle in it, and makes about 1,250 to 1,300 on the 670 tune-up. So the trans has seen a lot of abuse. We went to Diesel Truck Wars this last weekend, and first round of qualifying, he felt second gear slip. Came back and checked the adjustment on the second gear band, and it was gone. Had no second gear, and it was like $2,200 purse. He was really wanting to chase it. So we got a little creative with our shift strategy, and we decided to just stretch first gear out, move third gear in, shift it first to third, and lock the converter late at like 58 mile an hour so it doesn't bog the engine down with lockup coming in early in third gear. And we put nitrous in it to make up for the extra lost time from not having lockup in early. And he ended up winning the event, ran a 670 with a 6 at 110 miles an hour in the finals. But we're going to open up the trans, and I'm just going to show you guys what a transmission. This is a Comp 3 that after a season of beating on it, and if you get to the point where you're making 1,700 horsepower in a full weight truck, sooner or later you're going to tear up the second gear band. It can only hold for so long. But I thought it'd be fun to just open it up, show you guys what we see in a transmission after it's been rode hard and put away wet. And the tricky thing is he had to go into eliminations without knowing what it ran, because by the time we got that figured out, it was already elimination. So you're going up, and you know if you don't get it right the first time, you lose. So it's that's why we decided, rather than him turning CSP5 up and adding another 150 horsepower on fuel and having that power all the time, we decided to leave it on a 670 tune-up on fuel and have a push-to-pass button. So he just pretty much tried to beat him on the tree and then beat him to the stripe. And then after he won 2 rounds and he kind of got the handle of like, hey, the truck's running pretty close to the number where it was, and then in the finals he actually had a broke by the guy who he was supposed to race in the finals, had converter bolts come loose in his Chevy, and so he couldn't actually make the call. So Landon had the win. All he had to do was take the stripe, but he decided to run it out just to see what it would run, and ran a 670 with a 6. So he was I was pretty impressed that it actually worked, because when you drive 10.5 hours over the mountain, tow a truck out there, and then first round you have a problem and you're like, seriously? See where his second gear band adjustment is? Because generally you have a 1/4 inch of your adjuster sticking out, and there's still got a lot of play, so the band's just plain smoked. Anytime you adjust it and your adjustment screw goes in flush, then you know that your second gear band is about at the end of its life. I'll let you do your job. I got my hands dirty. Who's going to pay for this? This is the overdrive clutch. So here you can see the machine pressure plate. And that's the overdrive clutch. So you can see, like realistically here, you see these clutches really look good. Has a little bit of heat marks in it, but nothing that causes a problem. For the amount of passes that are on this and the amount of power the truck makes, for the overdrive clutch to look that good is good. You know, you start seeing the heat, and that's just from when it applies, it gets heat in the clutch, but still full thickness. The steel showing a little bit of heat here on the side, but really overall, no hot spots, a little bit of heat marks. We see that pretty normal after a season of high horsepower in a full weight truck. Those clutches would still go another season with what I'm seeing there. I don't see anything to be concerned about there. This is the pump gears. I don't see any scoring. We always want to inspect those. Generally, the more pressure you run, the more likely you are to tear up a pump over time, just because it has a lot more load on it. But we always just inspect the sealing surface in here on the pump and also on the back of the stator. If you ever have a converter balloon, the converter will press down on this gear and drive the inner pump gear into that surface and tear up the pump. But sometimes simply just high line pressure will do it. But that pump looks good. Here you can see second gear band and why Lana didn't have any second gear. That's all the way down to metal on metal. Nothing left of it. It's down to, you can see the metal on metal here. Absolutely gone. This is the third gear direct drum that the band applies onto. So what we like to see is generally what happens is once we get low on the adjustment screw, we'll actually pull the trans and put a fresh band in it. That keeps you from having to buy a replacement drum. But here we were at a race, first pass out, and we knew second gear was gone. We had no choice but to run it, and when it runs it on down, it actually tears up the drum. Here you can see that you've got grooving here on this drum, so we'll have to replace that drum. You can machine these drums down 10 thou, but once you turn them down more than 10 thou, then this band adjustment becomes, the band will actually touch each other. So this one we're going to replace. And this is your third gear direct clutch inside of here. But this is third gear. Looks good. You'll notice that the piston applies from the bottom. So the clutches closest to the piston generally have the least amount of wear, because the further it goes from the piston, there's less force on it. Here we see a couple hot spots, but overall that direct clutch is looking great. Those hot spots, you can't feel those in there. During the clutch apply, so if you're making 1700 horsepower and this clutch tries to stop and it can't stop the clutch right away, it doesn't take long for it to make this clutch extremely hot, extremely quick. But for the amount of passes that's on this transmission, to just have a couple hot spots, I mean, these clutches still look great. See a little bit of darkness in there, but overall, I don't see anything to complain about. Now, this would still go another season. That would go another season, but the second gear band, definitely not. It's spent. It's gone. So that's where we get to the point where the second gear band can only hold so much. We have tried so many different second gear bands. We've tried the billet rigid bands, the A&A bands, the Suncoast bands, and what generally happens, we always end up going back to these flex bands, because 9 times out of 10, if you run this until you get a second gear slip and you stop racing, like we should have done with Landon's, but we wanted to win, we'd have brought back and this band would have been black and we'd been able to replace the band without replacing the drum, and it wouldn't have done damage to the drum. But because we kept making another 5 passes at power with this band the way it was, it tore up the drum. The billet rigid bands, once they slip, they absolutely destroy the drum every time, because they're a lot more aggressive material on here. It's the difference of a inexpensive, affordable band versus a $200 band. I feel like bang for the buck, those bands, you can't go wrong, because I have, in the Pro Street truck, I tried every band possible, and it seemed didn't matter. Once we got to a certain horsepower level, making 2,500 horsepower, every 10 passes in the Pro Street truck, we had to put a band in it. But if you back the thing off to 1,800, 2,000 horsepower in the Pro Street truck, and then it would go 25, 30 passes. So on Landon's truck, it's not your horsepower as much, it's the weight. So the heavier it is, it lowers your count. Like the transmission that's in the quad cab has been in there for 2 summers, racing 670. Truck makes 1,300 horsepower on the 670 tune-up. Same band, haven't touched it. But I could take that truck, put another 300 horsepower in it, like I did when I ran my 983 at 140 pass, and my band would suddenly start being overpowered, and it would significantly decrease the life of the second gear band. So on these transmissions, they're good, strong transmissions, but they still have limitations, and it really comes down to horsepower versus weight. So you really want to set up whatever class you want to run. You want to set up your horsepower to weight ratio at a setting that your transmission can survive. Because if you have an 8,000 pound truck, and you want to make 2,000 horsepower, I don't care who you are, who builds it, you're going to be in your transmission a lot. But if you make that same horsepower in a 4,000 pound truck, it can go laps. Like Austin Deutsch, he has a 48 RE and this truck weighs close to 4,000 pounds, makes 2,000 horsepower, and he's got 50 passes and hasn't touched the trans, and it just goes laps. It's a big difference. It's just weight versus horsepower. But I thought this was a good example because you can see the overdrive clutch looks decent, the direct clutch looks decent, the forward clutches still look great. This is your forward clutch. These are your overdrive directs. These clutches, I mean, they just look brand new. The dark color on there is how they look after they get soaked in fluid for so long. You can see on the steels they have no slipping. These clutches, their only job is this 800-pound spring right here actually holds them engaged all the time, and this job is to keep the overdrive planetary and the overdrive from spinning in first, second, and third. So while you're driving down the road, that big spring is mechanically engaging that clutch pack, and it keeps that overdrive planetary from overdriving first, overdriving second, and overdriving third. Then when the overdrive clutch comes on, this clutch pack right here sits in front of this small clutch pack here, like this. When this clutch pack right here engages, it not only engages this clutch, but it also presses back, compresses that 800-pound spring, and disengages this. So that's why your overdrive clearance in your transmission is very important, that the correct selectives are applied, because if you don't have your clearance right, and then it will actually drag this clutch because it's not fully disengaging this one, you'll end up burning this overdrive clutch here. But this overdrive clutch is what's doing most of the work when it's applying, because this one's held mechanically. It's mechanically engaged in first, second, and third, and it's just when overdrive comes on that gets released. But the clearances have to be correct, or else you'll have a problem that will tear up these clutches here. But that's just a quick little crash course. I think it's fun to take these transmissions apart after we beat on them. We have tried really hard to come up with the best scenario for these transmissions. Like, this is your 35 spline Sonics input shaft. You can see it's still nice and straight. We've had good luck with those. Between those and the Sander shafts, they're great input shafts for the Comp 3s. I had said this was a Comp 3. It's technically a Comp 2.5 because he still does have a standard size output shaft, because he originally started with a Comp 1 when he was 700 horsepower, and we've just added parts as we increased horsepower in Landon's truck. But said Landon's won a lot of races with this truck. He's beat on it on a daily basis, and also going to a lot of the races. So we'll put a second gear band in this thing, put it back together, and get it back in business.